our reframing discussion. We now know that money equals work. That's another way to think about money. But we also know that we have to store our money in some way. Money is work, but then what do we do with it? So one of the things we can do with it is to think of money as cash. And so cash is a way to store our work. We get handed cash in our paycheck. We get handed cash maybe in currency, in dollar bills or regular currency or coins. And this is cash. So cash is king. I'll say that quite often. Cash is king. And the reason we say cash is king is it's because it's the most liquid way to exchange work. So we can barter. We could certainly trade products from one another, but basically we turn everything into this liquid form of stored work, which is cash. And so when you think of cash, you think cash is king because it's the only way to pay your bills. You can't pay your bills with a laptop or an iPhone, but you can pay your bills with cash. So cash is an asset. And when you think of what are assets, well, assets are places we've stored our work. You have an asset in your house, you have an asset in your car, you have an asset in your laptop, you have an asset in all kinds of other things. And so when you think of where you're storing your work, we start to say it in terms of assets. So assets are a collection of stored work. If we go past that, we say, okay, well, how many assets do I need? Well, one of the typical goals you have is when are you going to retire? Well, if we reframe retirement is we've stored enough work that we don't have to work anymore. So when is retirement? When do you get to retire? When you don't have to work anymore and other people will just work for you. It's kind of like being a king, right? So when you start thinking about becoming your own king, you have to have stored enough work so you no longer have to work. In other words, you've got enough work in the bank, you've got enough money in the bank that you can just give people money, but you don't have to do anything to get money back in return. That's called retirement. And so if you reframe retirement in terms of work, you can see how we're changing the way we think about things and how we decide what we want to do in life. For example, you could decide that I want to work a lot when I'm young. I want to put away a lot of stored work, and then when I'm older, I don't want to work at all. And as soon as I don't have to work at all, I'm going to stop working. You could also do it the other way around and say, you know what? I want to live life to the fullest when I'm young, while I'm vibrant, and I have a great life. And you could spend all your money ahead of time and go deep into debt and then spend your old age working. And a lot of people do it that way. Most people just moderately go through life and have a balance of the two, but you don't have to do that. If you reframe it as work, you start to find out, you go, oh, now I understand why I want to retire. It's because I don't want to work, but I have to store enough work so I can. A way to store work is to create a budget. So when you start storing your work, it's a budget. So that Benjamin Franklin used to say way back when in his Poor Richard's Almanac, that you should a penny saved is a penny earned. Well, so if you put away your pennies and it adds up, and of course compounding interest, you'll know compounding interest is a wonderful thing, you'll end up with more stored work than so you don't need to work. Well, what is a budget? So we want to reframe budgets from being a negative of a limitation. We all have limitations on how much money we could spend. So we're going to stop thinking about it as a limitation. We're going to reframe it into a positive because budgets sound like a diet. Nobody wants to go on a diet. Nobody wants to be on a budget. That all sounds negative. So what are budgets really? We have limited resources, we have a limited amount of stored work, and we have a limited capacity to gain stored work from other people or money from other people. So if that's the case, what's a budget? A budget is a choice on how we spend our stored work. So budgets, if you just change the word to choices, you will make different decisions. You won't feel about it as negative, and you'll start trading work for work with other people, in a more wise way. Instead of saying, well, I just want to do this because I feel I need to, you'll think, is this really worth 4 hours of my time, or would I prefer to have 4 hours of my time doing something else? So you want to make choices instead of a budget, and you have limited resources, so you limit your choices, and you say, how much do I want to work, and how much do I want other people to work for me? And of course, the dilemma here is what we'd all like, and some people are fortunate enough to have, but not everyone, and most of us are not in that case, where what I'd really like is everybody work for me and I don't have to work at all. And that is not necessarily most people's situation, or will it be anytime soon. As soon as you store up enough work, that can be the case, but until then, it can't be. So we have to make choices, and by choices, we create a budget. Now, the other thing is, when we decide how much we want to spend our stored work, we can reframe it and reframe the word debt into this kind of conversation, into this kind of view, and say, what is debt? Well, debt is leverage. I've used this in other classes too. Debt is leverage. It magnifies the result of whatever you spend it on. So if you invest in a house and you put a down payment in and the house goes up in value, your down payment earns you a higher return. If you borrow money for a car and the car eventually will end up being worth zero, you have magnified your loss because you're paying interest on the debt. Well, what debt really is in terms of stored work is debt is the amount that you're borrowing of other people's work, so you can not work now and have other people work for you. Now, the problem with that is in the future, you're going to have to work to repay that stored work for them. So you're going to work for them, but you're not going to just work for them equal amount. You're going to work for them the amount that you borrowed from them, but you're also going to work a little extra called interest. So when you think about debt, think about, I'm going to work in the future more than I'm going to work now if I didn't borrow this money. And all of a sudden you start thinking, oh, well, maybe I should borrow so much. That's exactly right. That's why when I say leverage, debt is leverage, you only want to use leverage when it's an appreciating asset, when the asset is going to go up in value. If the asset is going to go down in value, that was like a car or a credit card payment or something like that, and where you've spent your money on a vacation to Hawaii and now all of a sudden you have to pay interest on it, that is not a wise financial decision, as you can see, because you'll be working more than you need to pay for the vacation if you had saved up the vacation in the first place. So these are examples of reframing. And this is just one of dozens of models that we're going to use to improve your decision making throughout this course. Reframing the situation to view it differently just creates different emotions and it gets different responses. If you think differently, you will end up with different responses. If you end up with different responses, you will get different results and hopefully better results because you're thinking about things more clearly in ways that you haven't thought about it before. In the next section, we'll talk a little bit about more reframing, and I'll give you some examples beyond the ones we've covered here.